Hello everyone and welcome. Today I'll be talking about how to create virtual 360-degree interactive exhibits that can extend the life and reach of physical exhibitions. As a quick background, my name is Pahl, and I'm the Digital Curation Librarian at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I joined UAB in 2023 and am primarily responsible for managing our digital collections and ensuring public accessibility. Before that, I worked at a history museum in Florida, where I became especially interested in the challenges of preserving and extending the impact of temporary exhibits. We're going to start out by talking about why we decided to create a virtual exhibit in the first place, and then I'll walk you through some of the early challenges we faced, how we organized the digital version with a brief description of the exhibit itself, and finally, I'll show you some of the interactive elements that we built into it. Before we had a specific exhibit in mind, or really the necessary software, I was interested in the idea of creating virtual representations of physical exhibits. At my previous job in a history museum in Florida, we often spent years researching and developing temporary exhibits that were only on display for 6 months to a year, and we want to try to preserve some of the exhibit through photos, but they rarely capture the full experience, kind of like the photo on this slide. A virtual exhibit allows us to go beyond that. By making it publicly available online, we can open access to anyone with an internet connection, not just those who can visit the exhibit in person. It also becomes a lasting resource that reflects the research and scholarship behind the exhibit, and something that can be cited or included in future publications. Beyond preservation, virtual spaces also offer practical uses. For example, we can create virtual walkthroughs of our library to help visitors navigate the building and locate specific services or rooms. One of the reasons that this is important is because the physical exhibit space that we're working with is a bit hard to find. It's located on the second floor of our library, which means people sometimes have trouble finding out where in the building it actually is. And it also helps sell the necessity of this software when we can show how other entities in the library can use it. The exhibit we used as our pilot project is titled Navigating Communication, Breaking Invisible Barriers. It's housed in our Lister Hill Medical Library and explores the experiences of individuals in the deaf, blind, and deafblind communities. The goal of the exhibit is to highlight both the challenges and resilience within these communities, especially in how people navigate communication in a world that's not always designed with accessibility in mind. To support that goal, the physical exhibit includes a range of interactive components, touchable artifacts, hands-on activities, virtual reality goggles, and other tools designed to engage visitors through multiple senses. These elements make the exhibit not only more engaging, but also more inclusive. The software program that we used to create the virtual exhibit is called Scenario VR, and there are a number of similar products and platforms out there, but we ended up choosing this one because our business school was already using it for a few different training projects, and so we kind of had easier access to it. To capture the 360-degree images, we used an Insta360 X3 camera on a tripod that could take photos through an app, giving the user time to get out of the shot. Our library has several of these, some of which are available for public use. And because of that, we were also able to kind of promote the use of that material in our technology collection, in addition to the exhibit itself. Aside from a few initial hiccups, the camera worked well for our needs. It provided high quality imagery and was relatively easy to use once we figured out the best positioning and workflow. Like with any new tool, we ran into some early challenges. One of the first issues came up during our 360-degree photo captures. We found that when we added the photos to Scenario, the footage was tilted. You can see an example of that tilt in this video here as I scroll kind of in a straight line across the screen. We also had to experiment with the camera height. Initially, the angle made it feel like the viewer was either too low, closer to a child's perspective, or looking down from an unnatural height. Our goal was to mimic the experience of someone walking through the exhibit, so we defined a natural kind of human level eye perspective. Another consideration was spacing. We need to figure out how far apart to place each 360-degree capture point. Too far and the experience felt disjointed, like the viewer was just kind of jumping from one spot to another. And if it was too close, it required too many scenes, expanded the file size, and kind of bogged down the user experience. And so we had to strike a balance between maintaining both that flow and the clarity. This first exhibit was very much a learning experience that was intentionally over-engineered so we could get a better understanding of Scenario's capabilities and a feel for what worked best in terms of engagement and usability. We incorporated a wide variety of interactive elements, some of which we may not or probably will not use in the future exhibits. But this experimentation was really helpful for us to understand what kind of interactivity enhances the visitor experience and what might be unnecessary or distracting in future projects. So this is an example of what the exhibit looks like from viewer's perspective. As you can see, users can pan around the space, move between scenes, interact with embedded content. The goal was to make the experience intuitive, engaging, and accessible to a wider audience. In terms of layout, the virtual exhibit begins at the physical entrance and allows users to move through the space scene by scene. Each scene represents a different capture point within the exhibit. We arrange these scenes to simulate the feeling of walking through the exhibit, taking logical steps from one section to the next. At the same time, we are careful not to overload that experience with too many clicks or transitions. And just, again, trying to maintain that balance of interactivity and usability. So this is kind of the same thing, but on the back end. This is not what a visitor would see. It is kind of working with the product itself. So on the left, you can see a list of all the scenes that make up the exhibit with the top layer of the interactive elements listed for each scene. In the center, you get a preview of the scene you're working on, where you can add or edit interactive elements. While the general structure mirrors what the end user sees, the back end gives you all the control. You can move elements around, adjust their behavior, and fine-tune how the viewer experiences each part of the exhibit. One of the most engaging aspects of this virtual exhibit is a range of interactive elements that we were able to include. For example, throughout the exhibit, you'll find informational text boxes that provide additional context about each artifact on display. And as you can see in this video, there is a 3D model embedded directly into the virtual space that you can click on and interact with. It enlarges, rotates, and you can see it from multiple angles, adding to that kind of tactile feel to a digital experience. We've also embedded a digital publication, which you just saw, about the exhibit's development. Visitors can click on it, open up the booklet, and flip through the pages at their own pace. All the display cases in the exhibit are interactive. You can click on each one to zoom in and see the contents more clearly. Some cases have layered interactivity, which we'll see in a moment here, allowing visitors to click multiple times for deeper exploration. In many cases, objects within the exhibit are linked to downloadable PDFs, and this is that layered interactivity I mentioned. But visitors can also access kind of more detailed documentation or supplementary information through those PDFs. Our goal was to make the virtual space as immersive and educational as the physical one, while also offering new ways to engage with that content and potentially being able to learn more than you could in the physical exhibit just due to kind of space concerns. One of the most complex and rewarding interactive elements in the exhibit is a 3D model that was originally designed for hands-on assembly in a physical space. This model has 7 individual components that can be put together by a visitor in person. In the virtual version, we recreated that experience by allowing users to manipulate the model interactivity, reassembling it from the component parts within the platform. You can see the physical version on the table in kind of the background here. And you can see that model getting put together. This is kind of an example of how we tried to bridge the physical and virtual worlds to preserve the educational value and that almost tactical engagement with the exhibit. That being said, building and integrating this model was one of the most technologically challenging parts of this project. It took a lot of trial and error to get it right, but the final results came out better than expected, which is great. So now let's take a look at how some of the basic interactivity and navigation elements are built within Scenario VR. There's a plus sign drop-down menu shown here that gives you a range of options to add different interactive elements to your scene, such as text boxes, hotspots, buttons, and scene transitions. For example, the arrows that you were seeing throughout the exhibit are added through here. They let you kind of move from one location to another in terms of scenes, and they're created using this menu. Setting up a basic navigation path between scenes is pretty straightforward. You simply place an arrow where you want it, assign it to the next scene, and it's ready to go. Connecting the scenes to form a smooth walkthrough is also relatively easy. The foundational layout comes together pretty quickly. However, as your exhibit grows in complexity, you'll need to be thoughtful about navigation. In the middle sections especially, you'll want to link each scene to at least 2 or 3 others to ensure that visitors have flexibility in how they explore the space rather than being locked into a linear path. You want them to essentially be able to explore. So even with those branching choices, the process still remains pretty manageable. Once you understand the core building blocks of the platform, you can pretty quickly prototype and iterate your virtual layout. When it comes to adding more advanced interactivity, things start to get significantly more complex. These elements require more time, effort, and a deeper understanding of the platform. So as you can see in this scene, each line on the left represents an individual interactive element, and this is just one scene. That level of detail is fairly consistent across all of the scenes in this exhibit. While there are some shortcuts, like being able to copy and paste certain elements, much of the work has to be done manually for each scene to ensure everything functions as intended. There are different levels of interactivity that you can build depending on your goals. For example, making display cases interactive is fairly straightforward, but it still involves layering 3 or 4 components, such as a clickable hotspot, zoomed views, text overlays, and these are still relatively easy to manage once you kind of get the hang of it. On the other hand, more complex elements, like this digital publication, require significantly more planning. Each page has to be built in separately. And if you want users to navigate forward and backward through the publication, you have to create logic rules for each step. It's essentially a branching flow of if this, then that conditions. And you have to think carefully about how users will move through it and interact with it to make sure that they're not accidentally breaking it in the process. And how to recover if there is that type of break. So basic interactivity is easily to implement. Higher level features can be much more intricate. It's a balance between what adds value and what's feasible to build and maintain. Mentioned earlier, one of the most complex features in this exhibit is the interactive 3D model. Creating it required a substantial amount of time, detail, and trial and error. You can see on the left side of this video just how many individual elements went into making it function. And within each of those elements are layers of rules, commands, and conditional logic that govern how the model behaves. Every movement, rotation, and interaction had to be planned and built step by step. The model itself has multiple pieces that visitors can virtually assemble, and while it adds a compelling layer of interactivity to the exhibit, the process of creating it was extremely intensive. It's something that we're proud and happy that we tried, but it's also something that we're really unlikely to replicate in the future, given kind of the scale and the amount of time and effort that went into it. We may explore similar interactive models or use fewer components in the future, but this particular build required more effort than we believe is sustainable or necessary going forward. It's a great feature and it does enhance the user experience, but ultimately the return on investment just wasn't quite there in our interpretation. As we reflect on this project, we've learned a lot about what works well and what we would approach differently for our next one. First, when you're starting out with a new tool, especially something as visual and interactive as Scenario VR, expect there to be a learning curve. We ran into early issues with camera angles, distorted scenes, and figuring out the right balance between movement and user control. That process of trial and error was critical in kind of understanding the system and what we wanted to accomplish. Second, more interactivity isn't always better. While we explored a wide variety of features to see what the platform could do, we learned that simple interactions like clickable cases or pop-up text often had more of an impact than complex builds like our 7-piece 3D model. The model was fun and added value, but the time and effort didn't really match the return, and it is fairly easy for something to go wrong or something to break on those more complex items versus it's pretty impossible to break the more simple actions. Third, planning and pacing are everything. Thinking about how visitors will navigate the space virtually, making sure they can move in a way that feels natural and not overwhelming them with too many scenes or too many clicks. These are all things that we fine-tuned kind of as we went along and will continue to refine through future exhibits. Planning is super important for this, or you'll end up kind of going back to the exhibit space over and over again to just kind of adjust where you took a photo or adjust the spacing, and making those changes later on can cause almost cascading effects where you have to replace all of the navigation controls, all of the embedded elements if you change the scene. But planning is super important. Finally, one of the things we were really concerned about was kind of the sustainability of the platform and trying not to have something that relied on proprietary software that locked us into using that one product and not being able to do anything if we decide to go with a different product in the future, or if we stopped paying for a membership or account. Scenario VR has the ability to export a self-contained exhibit that we can run offline or embed it into a website. And it made it more future friendly because of those options than we originally thought. And it is one of the reasons we were drawn to this product. These lessons are already shaping how we approach our next virtual exhibits, both in terms of scope and design decisions. One of the big things that we're going to do for our next one, or that we are currently doing for our next one, is instead of taking photos of the cases once they're closed, we're getting photos of them without the plexiglass tops so that you can see into the cases a little bit better and you have kind of a closer view of what's going on. It'll help with glare, and it will give viewers a better view of the items on display. So I mentioned this on the last slide, but one of our major concerns when choosing a platform like this was the risk of getting locked into proprietary software, where, again, if we stop paying for the subscription, we would lose access to everything we've built. That is kind of always a worry with these cloud-based tools, especially for institutions focused on long-term preservation access. Kind of defeats the purpose if we are locked into a platform and we can't access it anymore. It's not really long-term access. So one of the reasons we ultimately chose Scenario VR is that, unlike some of the other platforms we looked at, it allows you to export a fully functional version of the exhibit. You can run it offline on a personal or institutional machine, and you can also embed it directly into a website. This gives us a lot more flexibility and kind of ensures that we retain this exhibit past our usage of the platform itself. The QR code on this slide will take you to the embedded version of the exhibit, so that if you're interested, you can check it out yourself and explore the space and interactivity we've built in and see if it's something you're interested in. And now, while you still need the scenario software to kind of edit or make changes to an exhibit, the public-facing version remains accessible and usable even without an ongoing subscription, which again is a huge benefit for us and one of the key reasons we felt comfortable investing so much time and effort into this platform. There's one other thing that I didn't include in the slides because it's not quite there yet, but is something we're potentially looking at in the future. This scenario gives you the ability to create AI-assisted scenes. Right now, they are not really in a usable quality, at least in my mind. They are kind of interesting to play with, but they definitely have a lot of errors, and there's some pretty big limits on how you can use them. But there is a pretty solid potential use there in the future, either for exhibits or for kind of a smaller, maybe student-based projects, where you can have someone design a more fantastical exhibit and have more freedom with what's going on. So that is something we are looking at and may address in the future. But hopefully I've given everyone enough time to scan that QR code if they're interested. With that, I will close it out. If there are any questions, my email address is listed here. Feel free to email me and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you all.